Human flesh stall rocks Katoomba markets. Have you ever imagined a peaceful town slowly turning into a place of fear? Tucked away in the Blue Mountains, NSW, near the vast, imposing Gros Valley, was the small town of Katoomba in 2022. The town was like a little haven, hidden behind a curtain of blue-grey eucalyptus trees. Deep, misty valleys stretched as far as the eye could see. Crisp, cool air flowed down from the escarpments, and every morning, the sound of kookaburras laughing echoed through the air. Life was simple, filled with a strong sense of community, a pride for the locals who were long used to pitching in and helping a mate. Since the crack of dawn, the main street leading to the weekend markets was always bustling. Mums carried wicker baskets or reusable bags on their arms. Blokes parked their utes, loaded with fresh produce from properties nearby. Little kids ran around barefoot on the grass, laughing loudly. The Katoomba community markets were the heart of the town, a place where people met, swapped stories, or just asked how the family was doing. The air was filled with the cheerful noise of stallholders spruiking their goods, mixed with the scent of fresh veggies, artisan bread, the sharp smell of local cheeses, and the coppery scent of freshly butchered meat. It all mixed together, creating a unique atmosphere that made anyone happy to linger. Among those familiar faces was a middle-aged woman named Sharon. She was past 50. Her body was a bit stooped from years of hard yakka, but her spirit was still bright. Almost every Saturday morning, she came to the markets with her basket to buy groceries for her small family. Her husband worked as a farmhand on a property out of town, while her son, Liam, was still in high school, year 11. For Sharon, the markets weren't just a place to shop. She felt it was a space to say good day, have a laugh, and hear the latest news, good or bad. To her, chatting with everyone just made life feel a bit lighter. That day, in early July 2022, the sky over Katoomba was clear. The sun rose slowly from behind the Three Sisters rock formation, casting a warm glow on the roofs of the old weatherboard cottages. But behind the peaceful daily routine, there was one thing that always made some locals uneasy. The bushland of the Gros Valley had long been considered spooky. There were countless stories passed down from grandparents to grandkids. Tales of hikers vanishing without a trace. Whispers of a woman's wail heard in the dead of night. Some believed it, others thought it was just a yarn to scare the kids. Sharon didn't want to think about it. All she had on her mind was cooking a roast chicken for the family that night. She stopped at the stall of Dave, a butcher aged around 45. The bloke was known for being friendly, often giving discounts to his regulars. The price of meat at his stall was usually cheaper than at the supermarket, so many mums made it their first choice. That morning, a few people were already in line. From a distance, the cuts of red meat arranged on the large wooden board looked normal. But as the sunlight hit the stall, Sharon felt something was off. The grain of the meat looked too fine. The fat was a pale, sickly color, and the texture was just odd. She leaned in, staring closer. Her brow furrowed, her lips trembled, and a quiet whisper escaped her. Why does that look? Why does that look just like human meat? For a second, Sharon froze. The basket in her hand almost slipped. A young bloke queuing next to her got curious. He also leaned in to look. His face suddenly went white as a sheet, and in a shaky voice, he yelled, "Bloody hell! That's a human hand!" In a split second, the lively market turned to chaos. Panic-stricken screams erupted. People dropped their shopping, some were even trampled in the panic. The sickly, metallic smell of blood hung heavy in the air, making some people vomit on the spot. Dave just stood frozen behind his stall. His face was pale, sweat pouring down his face. The rumor spread like wildfire through dry grass. "There's a stall selling human meat. That was the news passed from mouth to mouth. In no time, almost the whole town knew. Some were crying hysterically, some ran straight home and locked their doors, others ran to find their families. Police secure the butcher, a name, Raker, emerges. The town's usually peaceful atmosphere was suddenly smothered in a fear they had never felt before. Two council rangers who were on duty near the town hall immediately ran towards the crowd. They tried to calm the mob, but the locals were already furious. All eyes were fixed on the big wooden table at Dave's stall. On it lay a severed human hand, the fingernails still intact. The rangers quickly covered the table with a top and pulled Dave away. But the crowd roared. "He's a murderer. String him up." Dave's wife, Tracy, pushed through the crowd, sobbing. "My husband's innocent. He's just a butcher. Please don't hurt him." Her cries just made the scene more chaotic. It wasn't long before the Katoomba police arrived in a paddy wagon and 2 patrol cars. A young officer named Constable Ben Carter immediately took charge. With a loud voice, he gave the command. "Clear the market area. Everyone back away. This is now a crime scene." Dave was immediately handcuffed. His face was ashen, his voice trembling. "I don't know anything. I just bought the meat from an acquaintance. I swear to God, I didn't know it was human." But who would believe him? For the locals, the sight on that stall was all the proof they needed. A few young guys almost lunged at Dave before the police fired a warning shot into the air. The crowd slowly dispersed, though the terrified whispers continued. By that afternoon, the news had spread through all of Katoomba. Kids were forbidden from going outside. Mums locked their doors up tight. Meanwhile, the men gathered at the local pub, discussing the worst possibilities. "Is it some organ harvesting ring?" asked one old-timer, nursing his beer. "Nah, mate," another replied. "This is the work of something from the Gros Valley bush. Haven't people always gone missing out there?" The name Gros Valley returned to haunt them. Old stories of lost convicts, of bushrangers who vanished. It all resurfaced, adding to the town's fear. That first night after the incident, Katoomba looked different. House lights stayed on late into the night. Doors were double-locked. From far off, dingoes howled in unison. It was as if the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for something unseen. Sharon couldn't sleep a wink. The image of that hand at the stall kept haunting her. She looked at her son Liam's face, sleeping restlessly, and her heart filled with dread. Meanwhile, at the police station, Constable Ben Carter sat in the interview room, staring at the handcuffed Dave. Ben tried to stay composed, but deep down, there was an unease he couldn't explain. That severed hand on the table. It felt like it was staring back at him. He knew this case wasn't just a simple mistake by a butcher. There was something bigger, something darker, hiding in the bushland of the Gros Valley. And that night, Ben promised himself, whatever it took, he had to find the truth. Ben remembered his fiancée, Mia, who vanished in the bush. The morning after the shocking discovery at the Katoomba markets, the town's air felt heavy. The sun was just rising, but the air was bitingly cold. The streets, usually filled with kids' laughter, were empty. Mums swept their front porches with grim faces. Blokes stood on their verandas, their anxious gaze fixed on the endless blue haze of the Gros Valley. In the station car park, 6 police officers, kitted out in bulletproof vests, armed with headlamps and a tracker dog, were getting ready. Constable Ben Carter stood before them, studying a topographical map with a serious look. Beside him, Detective Sergeant Frank Miller, who was leading the investigation, gave a short briefing. "We are going in from the South Access Trail. According to Dave, He always met the person who gave him the meat on the edge of the bush, near a small creek. Our focus is to find tracks, evidence, or any sign of suspicious activity. Remember, don't get careless. A young constable raised his hand, his face hesitant. Boss, the locals say that bushland is haunted. They talk about yoas and restless spirits. Should we, be worried about that stuff? Detective Sergeant Miller looked his man dead in the eye. We're police. Our job is to deal with people. But I'm not blind. Fear can be more dangerous than a bullet. So stay sharp. The team moved out. The 4Ws stopped at the trailhead, at the foot of the mountains. The rest of the journey was on foot. The morning sun was filtered by the dense eucalyptus canopy, making the atmosphere dim and damp. The ground was muddy, the sound of twigs snapping under their boots and the scent of damp earth mixed with the cold air, adding to the unnerving feeling. Ben walked at the front with the tracker dog. Every time the wind blew, the hairs on his neck stood on end. He felt as if eyes were watching him from behind the gum trees. But he tried to push the fear down, forcing himself to remember the face of his fiancée, Mia, who had disappeared 2 years ago near this very trail. In his heart, Ben promised that if there was any connection between Mia's disappearance and this event, he wouldn't stop until he found the truth. After almost a kilometer, the tracker dog barked loudly. The team stopped. Ben shone his torch on the ground. There were faint brownish stains among the dry leaves. He touched a bit with a gloved finger, then lifted it to his nose. The smell was sharp. It's blood. Mark the location. A team member immediately took notes and a sample. Not far from there, they found dirt bike tire tracks, still clear in the damp earth. The tracks led deeper into the bush. Detective Sergeant Miller nodded slowly. Dave wasn't lying. Someone is definitely coming in and out of this bush carrying heavy loads. The trek continued, more carefully now. The bush grew darker. Even though it was daytime, the massive mountain ash trees stood close together like a wall. The sounds of cockatoos and lyrebirds echoed strangely, and every so often, the sound of a branch snapping came from the distance. The whole team felt like they were being watched. Suddenly, an officer pointed at the ground. "Sir, look at this." On the ferns, there were clear drag marks, as if something heavy had been pulled through. The long line was mixed with dirt and dark stains. Everyone fell silent. Wild imaginations kicked in. Was this the trail of a human body being dragged? Ben swallowed hard, then said calmly, "We follow this trail. But keep formation." They followed the narrow path until they reached a small clearing. There stood a rickety old shack made of corrugated iron and rotted wood. The roof was almost caved in. Scattered around it were empty beer bottles, old Hessian sacks, and rusted tools. The tracker dog growled low, its fur standing on end. The strange, foul smell got stronger. The shack is found. A victim ledger includes Mia's name. All officers raised their weapons. Ben called out in a loud voice. "Police? Anyone in there?" No answer. Only the sound of wind ripping at the tin roof. 2 officers approached and kicked the flimsy door. The door flew open. The stench of decay hit them immediately. Several officers gagged, nearly vomiting. Inside, the scene was grim. There was a small wooden table with a rusted butcher's knife stuck to it, caked in dark stains. In the corner lay several large Hessian sacks. One of them was torn, revealing a piece of women's clothing with dried stains on it. Detective Sergeant Miller clenched his fists. Jesus Christ! This isn't just a hideout. It's a slaughterhouse. Ben moved to another corner. He found a tattered old notebook. Its pages were filled with handwritten scrawls. Some were in strange symbols that were hard to read. But there was a clear list: names, ages, and dates. 3 of them matched reports of missing persons from Katoomba in recent months. Then, one name made Ben's heart stop. Mia. Age 24. Ben's vision blurred, his breath caught in his throat. His world felt like it was collapsing around him. Detective Sergeant Miller looked at him with a sympathetic face. Ben, we have to stay professional. I know this is hard, but this is exactly why we have to catch this bastard. Before they could plan their next move, a faint voice was heard in the distance. Help! Help me! Everyone froze. It was clearly the voice of a weak, hoarse woman. Ben gave the signal. The team moved quickly, following the sound. They pushed through dense wattle bushes until they found a shallow hole in the ground, covered with branches. Carefully, they pulled the branches away. Inside, a young woman was tied up tightly. Her mouth was gagged with a cloth. Her body was covered in bruises. As soon as she was freed, she fell unconscious into an officer's arms. It's Chloe. Age 23, a Katoomba local reported missing last month, one of the officers said, his voice choked. Ben whispered softly. We are on the right track. The person we are looking for is here. They immediately began to evacuate Chloe out of the bush. But before leaving, Ben looked back at the dark, towering trees. A strange feeling washed over him. He was certain that from behind the darkness, a pair of eyes was watching them, waiting for the right moment to emerge. That night, everyone realized the hunt had only just begun. A rescued girl names the suspect. That afternoon, after Chloe's rescue, the atmosphere in Katoomba grew even more tense. The news of the young woman found in such a horrific state made the locals truly believe that a dark force was hiding in the Gros Valley. Kids were forbidden from going out. Mums locked their doors tight, while the men gathered at the pub, their faces grim. At the police station, Dave sat in the interview room, hands cuffed. His face was pale, sweat dripping from his temples. He'd been looking at the floor since morning, only occasionally looking up when questioned. Ben Carter sat across the table, his gaze sharp. If you're really innocent, tell us who sold you that meat, Ben said in a low voice. Dave sobbed. His name's Raker. He'd come at night, on the edge of the bush near the creek. He said it was wild boar meat. I never opened the sacks until I got home. I swear, I didn't know. That name made Ben freeze. His chest tightened as if an old weight had just slammed back into him. Raker. 2 years ago, that name had surfaced right when Mia disappeared on the trails. Since then, his fiancée's missing person case had never been solved. Detective Sergeant Miller, standing in the corner of the room, looked at Ben. He knew the history surrounding that name all too well. Miller stepped forward, patting Ben's shoulder slowly. Ben, stay calm. We have to verify this first. But Ben couldn't hide the turmoil in his heart. He stared at Dave more intensely. Are you sure his name was Raker? Dave nodded quickly. As God is my witness, I'm not lying. That night, an emergency briefing was held. Detective Sergeant Miller led it, his face grim. Tomorrow morning, we go deeper into the Gros Valley. We hunt for tracks and evidence. But remember, that's not ordinary bushland. The locals believe it's full of dark spirits. We have to be ready for anything. Ben sat silently. His left hand gripped an old photo of Mia that he kept in his wallet. His gaze was distant, as if replaying the last night Mia disappeared. He still remembered it clearly. Mia had been heading home from her sister's place and never arrived. Reka had been mentioned as the last person seen near her. Meanwhile, outside the station, the town's atmosphere was growing more fraught. Locals gathered at the town hall, talking about the hand at the market, the shack in the bush, and the poor girl, Chloe, who'd been rescued. All the stories mixed into one, amplifying the fear. Some were convinced this was the work of a cruel man. But many more believed that Reka was no longer human, but some thing, allied with the spirits of the bush. Sharon, the first witness at the market, now hardly dared to leave her house. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that severed hand, the nails still intact. Her son, Liam, just sat in the corner of his room, his face sullen. He was embarrassed, confused, and terrified. His mates at school would definitely avoid him now, knowing his friend's dad, Dave, was mixed up in this horrifying case. Over at the mayor's house, Mayor Jeffries tried to calm the residents who had come demanding answers. His voice was firm, but full of doubt. "We have to leave this with the police. Don't take matters into your own hands." But some of the locals weren't satisfied. They were convinced the police couldn't fight the supernatural forces that were now stalking the town. Night fell quickly. The wind from the mountains rustled, carrying strange sounds, like faint, incomprehensible whispers. The town's lights blazed brightly, doors locked tight. The sound of hymns could be heard from the small local church on the corner, echoing through Katoomba. In his cramped office at the station, Ben sat lost in thought. His memory flashed back to the past. He could still feel Mia's smile, hear her soft voice, and their promise to build a small house together after he returned from his posting. Reka. That name now felt like a dagger twisting in his heart. Ben couldn't stop asking, was it really Reka who took Mia from him? And if it was, why? Detective Sergeant Miller came into the room, looking at Ben, who seemed broken. "Ben, I know this is tearing you apart. But remember, we can't get trapped in this psycho's game. If we let our guard down, this whole town could fall into chaos." Ben nodded slowly. Though his heart was still in turmoil, he knew that starting tomorrow, every step he took wasn't just about his duty as a cop, but also a personal journey to find the truth about the love he'd lost. And out there, in the dark bush of the Groves Valley, whether in that rotten shack or on some hidden track, a pair of eyes might be watching. The figure named Reka, who was now not just a suspect, but a shadow from the past, reopening old wounds. The first night, the town is gripped by fear. That night, Katoomba couldn't sleep. Everyone felt a bigger storm was about to hit. The night in Katoomba dragged on slowly. It felt as if time itself was reluctant to move. House lights burned brightly, but the fear was so cold that the light offered no warmth. The sounds of crickets and the rustling wind, which usually accompanied a peaceful country night, now sounded menacing. Every time a branch snapped, locals jumped in panic. At the town hall, people gathered, too afraid to go home. Some brought sleeping mats, others just sat leaning against the walls. Children slept in their mothers' laps, while the men sat restlessly, smoking one cigarette after another. They talked, they speculated, trying to calm themselves down. But in the end, it all came back to one name that now echoed through every corner of the town. A name that made their skin crawl, Reka. Some locals swore they'd seen a tall, thin figure in a ragged old Drisabone, oilskin coat, at the edge of the bush. Some said his eyes glowed red. Others claimed to have heard his laughter from a distance. The later it got, the more wild stories circulated, and the more people believed that Reka was no longer human. Meanwhile, at the police station, Ben Carter sat alone in the now empty interview room. His left hand gripped the photo of Mia, his fiancée who had vanished 2 years ago. His gaze was empty, but his eyes were red and watery. The name Reka felt like it had ripped open an old wound that had never healed. Ben remembered his last day with Mia. That afternoon, they sat on the edge of a lookout, watching the sunset paint the sky orange. Mia smiled, saying she wanted to build a small house with Ben right there after they were married. That smile was still so clear in his memory. The smile that vanished just as quickly as she did. Since that day, Ben had struggled to find her. But all traces stopped at the trailhead into the Gros Valley. And now, after 2 years, the name Raker had resurfaced. The name Dave the butcher had mentioned. The name written in that tattered notebook in the shack. Right next to MIA's name. Detective Sergeant Miller entered the room, looking at Ben with concern. "You can't let your emotions take over, mate. We have to keep thinking clearly." Ben took a long breath. "I can't just ignore it, boss. Every piece of evidence that pops up leads back to Raker. And if Mia was in his hands, I can't just sit back." Miller clapped him on the shoulder. "That's exactly why we have to be careful. We are not just up against a criminal, we are up against the fear of an entire town." In the locals' homes, the atmosphere was just as tense. Sharon sat hugging Liam, who was sleeping fitfully. Her eyes were weary, her mind kept returning to that morning at the market when she first saw the severed hand. Since then, she felt her life was no longer the same. She often whispered prayers, asking for protection, that her son and husband be kept safe from harm. At the mayor's house, Mayor Jeffries was talking with several community leaders. They discussed what steps to take if this terror continued. Some suggested organizing a town-wide neighborhood watch. Some wanted to evacuate to the next town over. But no easy decision could be made. That night, the sound of dogs barking echoed relentlessly. A few locals peeked from behind their curtains, hoping it was just a fox, but rumors spread quickly. Some said they saw a tall shadow walking on the edge of the main street. Others swore they heard a horse laugh near the old orchards. At the town hall, a young church pastor named Karim tried to calm the residents. "We cannot let fear rule our hearts. Whatever is happening, we must remember that evil only has power when we lose our faith." His words were soft, but there was still a tremor of fear on the faces of those listening. Ben, still at the station, finally stood up. He knew he wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. In his mind, there were only two things. First, his responsibility as a police officer to protect the town. Second, the longing for Mia that burned in his chest. He didn't know if Mia was still alive or if she had become a victim. But one thing was certain, this all started with Raker, and only by catching him could he find the answer. Detective Sergeant Miller finally decided to send a small team to stand guard at the edge of the bush that night. Although he didn't expect much, at least the police presence might provide a little comfort to the locals. Ben offered to go, and though Miller was hesitant, Ben's determined gaze was impossible to refuse. The night grew deeper. A light mist rolled down from the escarpment, blanketing the town's streets. From a distance, the sound of wind chimes rattling in the breeze sounded eerie. The residents who were still awake could only hug their families, praying for the night to pass quickly. And deep in the darkness of the Gros Valley, a thin figure in a ragged old Drizabone stood silently behind the trees. His eyes glinted as he looked towards the town. A faint smile crossed his lips. He knew his name was being spoken again. And that meant the game was just beginning. Raker appears, then vanishes. That morning, Katoomba was shrouded in a light mist that had rolled down from the Gros Valley. The streets were damp with dew. Water dripped from the gum leaves, and the air was cold enough to bite your bones. Locals were still afraid to leave their homes. The markets, usually bustling, were now quiet. Only a few brave stallholders had bothered to open. In the station car park, 6 officers stood ready with vests, weapons, and basic gear. Ben Carter stood at the front. His eyes stared straight towards the imposing, eerie silhouette of the mountains. Beside him, Detective Sergeant Frank Miller gave a short briefing. "We're going in via the South Trail, the one Dave mentioned. Our focus is finding evidence, anything that can link us to this person named Raker. Don't move alone. Stay in formation." The team set off with determined steps. The 4WD stopped at the trailhead. They continued on foot. Massive trees stood packed together, their roots snaking over the path. The sound of native birds echoed loudly, and every so often, a snapping twig made everyone turn warily. The tracker dog walked ahead, its nose occasionally dropping low before letting out a soft whine. Ben felt as if every step was leading him to something he had been searching for a long time. His memory flashed back to Mia. Her smile and her voice seemed to be present in the rustling wind. After nearly a kilometer, the tracker dog barked loudly. Ben crouched, shining his torch on the ground. There was a faint bloodstain on top of the dry leaves. He touched it with a gloved hand, then raised it. The metallic tang hit his nose. "This blood is fresh." Not far from there, they found the tracks of a dirt bike pressed into the damp earth. The tracks clearly led deeper in. Detective Sergeant Miller made a note, his eyes hardening. "Someone is definitely coming in and out of this bush." The journey continued, the atmosphere growing darker. Even though the sun was high, the towering trees formed a dense canopy, making it hard for light to get through. The team members started to feel a strange chill, as if they were being watched from behind the tree trunks. Suddenly, an officer pointed at the ground. "Look at this." There, drag marks of something heavy were visible. A long line mixed with dirt and dark stains. Ben felt his heart hammer in his chest. In a low voice, he said, "We follow this line." They stepped carefully, tracing the narrow path until they reached a small clearing. In the middle of it stood a rickety old shack made of corrugated iron and rotted leaves. Its roof was nearly caved in, its walls full of holes, and scattered around it were plastic bottles, old sacks, and rusted tools. The tracker dog sniffed loudly, its fur standing on end. The smell of decay was getting stronger. All the officers raised their weapons. Ben stepped forward, calling out loudly. "Police? Anyone in there?" No answer. Only the sound of the wind tearing at the tin roof. 2 officers kicked the flimsy door. The door flew open. The stench of decay hit them instantly, making several of them gag. Inside, the scene was grim. There was a small wooden table with a rusted butcher's knife caked in dark stains. In the corner lay several large sacks. One was torn, revealing a piece of women's clothing with dried stains. Detective Sergeant Miller clenched his fist. "Good God! This isn't just a hideout. It's a slaughterhouse." Ben searched another corner. His eyes fixed on a tattered old notebook, half damp. Carefully, he opened its pages, filled with handwritten scrawls. Some were written in strange symbols that were hard to read. Others contained a list, names, ages, and dates. Ben scanned them one by one. 3 names matched reports of missing persons from the town in recent months. Then his eyes stopped on one name, Mia. Age 24. Ben's heart felt like it stopped. His breath caught. His world seemed to collapse around him. The hand holding the book trembled violently. Mia's face flashed clearly in his mind. Her laugh, her gentle smile. It all came flooding back. Detective Sergeant Miller looked at Ben, who had gone pale. "I know this is hard for you. But remember, we can't get lost in this. The fact her name is here means we have to catch Raker immediately. Ben gritted his teeth. His voice shook but was full of resolve. I'll find him, boss. Whatever it takes, I'll find him. Suddenly, a faint voice was heard in the distance. A weak, hoarse woman's voice, crying for help. All the team members froze, looking at each other. Ben gave the signal. Follow that voice. They moved quickly, pushing through the scrub. After a few minutes, they found a shallow hole in the ground, covered with branches. Carefully, they pulled them away. Inside, a young woman was tied up tightly. Her mouth was gagged with a cloth. Her body was covered in bruises. As soon as she was freed, she fell unconscious into an officer's arms. An officer whispered, his voice choked. It's Chloe. A Katoomba local who went missing last month. Ben looked at the girl's pale face. He whispered softly. We are on the right track. Raker is here. They immediately began to evacuate Chloe from the bush. But before leaving, Ben glanced back at the dark, towering trees. A strange feeling washed over him. He was certain that from behind the darkness, a pair of eyes was watching, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And right then, Ben knew the hunt had only just begun. A trap is set, MIA's necklace is found. Dusk fell slowly over Katoomba. The sun vanished behind the blue mountains, leaving an orange sky that quickly turned dark. The town's atmosphere was grimmer than usual. People gathered at the town hall, their faces anxious, their voices hushed whispers. Fear had already crept into every corner. They had heard the news that the police had found a young woman in the bush, tied up and covered in wounds. The news spread like the wind, making the locals even more convinced that a dark force was hiding in the bushland. At the town hall, the girl lay weakly on a cot. Her name was Chloe. She was 23. A Katoomba resident who had been missing for a month. Her parents, who had nearly given up hope, were now weeping with relief, clutching her hand. Chloe's body was covered in bruises, her lips split, her eyes vacant. She couldn't speak much, only nodding occasionally when asked. Her mother's tears flowed freely. Thank God you're back, love. Ben Carter stood in the corner of the room, watching Chloe with a look of sheer determination. A new belief was growing in his heart: if Chloe could be found, then Mia might still be out there. He believed his fiancée wasn't completely gone. Detective Sergeant Miller sat next to the mayor, Mayor Jeffries. His voice was firm but weary. This discovery proves we are dealing with something more than just an ordinary criminal. Raker isn't just selling black market meat. He's a kidnapper, and possibly a serial killer. Mayor Jeffries sighed heavily. The town is terrified. They are starting to lose faith in their own safety. We have to act fast. If we don't, this town could empty out. Outside the hall, residents crowded around. Some were grateful Chloe was found. Others were even more panicked. An old-timer spoke in a low voice, staring towards the bush. I'm telling you, he's not human. He can go into that bush and just disappear. No ordinary bloke can do that. Those words spread immediately, adding to the tension. Some of the women whispered that the sound of Chloe crying for help sounded more like a lost spirit. It was all a mix of relief and terror. Night arrived. The lights of the town hall blazed. A few men stood guard outside. Ben sat not far from where Chloe was resting. He watched her every movement. The girl would wake up from time to time, her eyes filling with tears. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Finally, near midnight, Chloe spoke. Her voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. I saw him. Ben moved closer, kneeling. Who did you see? Chloe swallowed. A tall, thin figure. Wearing a ragged old Drisabone. His eyes? They were red. His laugh was terrifying. He called himself Raker. The room fell silent. Everyone who heard it felt a chill. That name echoed again, more real than ever. Detective Sergeant Miller let out a long breath. It's confirmed. He's really out there. Chloe began to sob again. I heard. Another voice. Someone was with him. Their voice was cold. But I never saw their face. Ben felt his heart pound. Another voice. Raker wasn't alone. Chloe was exhausted. She closed her eyes again. Her mother covered her with a thin blanket, while the police tightened the guard around the hall. Outside, the night air felt even colder. The wind from the mountains carried a faint sound, like a laugh echoing among the trees. The locals standing watch looked at each other, their faces pale. Ben stepped outside, standing and staring into the dark bush. He felt a gaze from the distance, as if eyes were following his every move. His left hand gripped MIA's photo tightly. He whispered softly. Mia? Wait for me. Detective Sergeant Miller joined him. Ben, we need a solid plan. I know your heart is tied to this case. But don't let your emotions blind you. Ben turned, his eyes sharp. It's because of Mia that I won't back down. If Raker is out there, I will find him. That night, the people of Katoomba barely slept. Children huddled in their parents' arms. Prayers were offered all night long. The town hall became their last fortress, a place where everyone gathered to find safety. But behind it all, there was one bitter realization: finding Chloe wasn't the end of the terror, but a sign that the game had only just begun. And in the Groves Valley, behind the thick mist, the thin figure in the ragged coat stood still. His laugh was low, his eyes glowing. He knew his name had been spoken. He knew his opponent was waiting. But that was exactly what he wanted. The game had just begun, and Katoomba was just a small stage for a much darker plan. A reckless posse, the town in chaos. The days after Chloe's discovery brought no peace to the residents of Katoomba. Instead, fear crept deeper into every corner of the town. The markets were empty, the orchards were untended, and children were not allowed to leave their homes. It was as if the town, usually full of laughter, had turned into a silent village, waiting for something to explode at any moment. Every night, the residents chose to gather at the town hall. They slept crowded together on the floor. Children huddled in their mothers' laps, while the men stood guard, their eyes full of suspicion. Pastor Karim led a group prayer almost every night. His voice trembled as he read holy verses, echoing amidst the cries of small children and the sobs of parents. But the prayers didn't completely erase the terror. Outside the hall, dogs barked relentlessly. Occasionally, a faint knock would be heard on an empty house door. And some residents claimed to see a tall shadow standing at the end of the street, only to vanish instantly. At Sharon's house, the fear felt more real. She often woke up in the middle of the night, hearing footsteps circling her house. Liam, her son, even swore he saw a tall figure in a ragged Drisabone standing far at the end of the laneway, staring at their home. As soon as he screamed, the figure vanished like mist in the wind. News like that spread quickly. The locals became more convinced that Raker wasn't just a man. Some believed he was some half-formed creature, allied with the spirits of the bush. Others whispered he had sold his soul and couldn't be killed by ordinary weapons. At the police station, the tension was also rising. Some of the younger officers were starting to waver. One asked to be transferred. Another admitted to having nightmares every night, seeing Raker standing at the foot of his bed. Detective Sergeant Miller tried to rally them. "We are police. Our job is to protect these people. Whatever happens, we cannot back down." His voice was firm, but his own face looked exhausted. Ben Carter sat silently in the corner. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mia's face. Sometimes he thought he heard her voice in the distance, calling his name softly. He didn't know if it was real or just his mind playing tricks. But one thing was certain, he believed Mia was still alive. One night, Ben recklessly decided to patrol the edge of the bush by himself. A cold wind blew hard, branches swayed, and the sound of night birds was hoarse. He stepped slowly, accompanied only by a small torch. Suddenly, he heard a faint sound. A woman's voice, softly calling his name. "Ben?" Ben's body went rigid. It was a voice he knew so well. Mia's voice. Ben held his breath. His eyes scanned every direction. "Mia? Are you out there?" The voice came again. This time, further into the bush. Ben took a step, even as his heart pounded. But as soon as he reached a small, dark clearing, the voice vanished. There were only the shadows of the trees. And there, from behind the darkness, emerged the tall, thin figure in the ragged coat. His eyes glinted red. His hoarse laugh cut through the air. He pointed at Ben with a slow, deliberate motion. Ben raised his weapon, his hand shaking. "Where is Mia? Tell me." The figure just laughed, then darted back through the trees. Ben chased him with all his strength, but his pursuit stopped when he saw a small blue scarf snagged on a low-hanging branch. The scarf was blue, dirty, and damp. And he knew it intimately. It belonged to Mia. Ben grabbed it, his hands trembling. Tears almost fell. Mia is still alive. But in the distance, the laughter returned, long and hoarse, as if mocking him. Ben gripped the scarf tightly. He knew one thing, this game wasn't over. Meanwhile, at the town hall, the residents were in an uproar again. A group of young men, who had tried to form a night patrol, returned with pale faces. They claimed to have seen Raker standing in the old apple orchard. His eyes were glowing red, his body thin, his voice terrifying. Mayor Jeffries tried to calm the locals, but the situation was becoming chaotic. Some wanted to leave, some wanted to fight back. But no one truly dared to enter the bush. That night, Katoomba felt like a ghost town besieged by fear. Lights blazed, prayers echoed, but Raker's shadow remained out there, waiting for the right moment to show himself again. And Ben, with the blue scarf in his hand, knew that he had stepped too deep into this deadly game. The following days in Katoomba grew heavier. The markets were still quiet, the orchards left to rot, and at night, the entire town chose to sleep at the town hall. Prayers echoed almost every hour, as if the whole village was guarding itself against something unseen. However, the prolonged fear began to curdle into a misguided bravery. A number of young men in the town felt their pride had been trampled. They weren't willing to let their town live in fear. Among them was a young man named Jake. His body was stocky, his face hard. He stood in the middle of the crowd at the town hall, shouting loudly, "If we keep waiting for the cops, this town will be finished. We are men of Katoomba, we can't just sit here." Several other young men cheered in agreement. They brought machetes, sharpened stakes, and even torches. Their faces were full of anger, though behind it, an unspoken fear lingered. The mayor, Mayor Jeffries, tried to stop them. "Don't be reckless. This isn't an ordinary enemy. The police are investigating, leave it to them." But Jake retorted loudly, "Wait, how long? Our kids are too scared to leave the house. The orchards aren't being worked, the markets are empty. If he's really a man, we can fight him." The atmosphere heated up. The locals were split between those who wanted to fight and those who wanted to wait. Detective Sergeant Miller finally intervened. He stood before the crowd, his face tense. "I understand your anger. But going into that bush unprepared is just suicide. Trust me, we are developing a strategy." But his words weren't enough to quell the anger. That night, a group of young men recklessly entered the bush, torches in hand. They shouted, calling Raker's name, challenging him to come out. Their voices echoed among the trees, shattering the night's silence. Not long after, screams were heard. Torches fell. Several of the young men ran back to the town, their faces ashen. Some collapsed in the middle of the street. "He's there! He's there!" one of them cried, sobbing. "His eyes? Glowing. He was standing right in front of us." The locals who heard the news were thrown into a panic. Many were crying. Some became hysterical, several screamed for the town hall to be locked tight. The situation descended into chaos. Ben, who was at the station, immediately ran to the town hall. He tried to calm them. "Everyone, stay calm. Go back to your homes or stay in the hall. Don't be provoked." But it was hard to calm hundreds of people already gripped by panic. A mother screamed loudly, "Lock the hall. Lock it now." Her voice made the crowd even more frantic. Detective Sergeant Miller finally ordered his officers to stand guard around the town hall. "If we let this go, it'll turn into a riot," he said, his face tense. That night, Katoomba was truly like a ghost town besieged by fear. The locals huddled together in tension. Children cried. Prayers were offered endlessly. Ben sat on the veranda of the hall, staring into the dark bush with eyes full of anger. He gripped Mia's blue scarf tightly. In his heart, he whispered, "If you're really still alive, I will find you." But he also knew, the further they got into this game, the more likely the town would be destroyed before the truth was revealed. And in the dark of the bush, the thin figure in the ragged coat stood still. His eyes glinted red. He smiled faintly, enjoying the panic that had seized the town. For him, the locals' fear was the fuel that made the night last longer. A blood symbol in the field, a secret book appears. The morning after that chaotic night, Katoomba felt grim. The mist still hung low, covering the abandoned orchards. People walked with weary faces. Some were busy packing belongings to move temporarily to the next town. The town hall remained full. Children ran around quietly inside, while the mothers sat lost in thought, their eyes empty. At the local cafe, the locals' conversations were full of despair. A middle-aged man said in a quiet voice, "If the cops can't catch Raker, we have to leave this town. There's no point staying." Another shook his head, his voice louder. "If we all leave, who will look after our homes and properties? We can't just give up like that." The argument reflected the town's divided heart. Some wanted to fight, some wanted to leave, and some could only resign themselves to fate. Meanwhile, at the police station, the atmosphere was also tense. Some of the younger officers were wavering. One whispered about wanting a transfer. Another admitted he couldn't handle night duty anymore. Detective Sergeant Miller slammed his hand on the table, silencing the room. "Enough. We are dealing with a cunning enemy, not a ghost. Remember your oath. If we back down now, who will protect these people?" But his words didn't completely erase the fear. Ben, who had been sitting at the end of the table, finally spoke up. "He won't stop until he feels he's won." Because of that, we have to force him out of hiding. All eyes turned to Ben. He stared straight ahead, his eyes red but full of determination. I'm willing to be bait. He wants to challenge me. Let me be the one to draw him out. Detective Sergeant Miller was silent for a long time. He almost refused, but Ben's gaze was unshakable. All right. But we will monitor you from a safe distance. Don't be reckless. That night, preparations were made. The police set up several observation points on the trails leading into the bush. Ben walked alone towards a large gum tree at the edge of the bush, a place where a strange symbol had once been found. He only carried a small torch, a radio, and his service weapon. The night air was biting cold. The wind carried strange sounds, like faint whispers. Ben stood under the large tree, staring at the trunk, which was covered in scratches. His heart beat fast. Suddenly, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Ben spun around, shining his torch. No one. Just bushes moving in the wind. Raker? Is that you? He yelled. If you want me, come out now. Silence. But a few seconds later, that hoarse laugh was heard, closer than before. Ben held his breath. From behind the trees, the tall, thin figure emerged. The ragged Drisabone covered his body, a hood obscured his face, but his red eyes glinted clearly in the dark. Ben raised his weapon, his finger ready on the trigger. The radio on his hip crackled. Detective Sergeant Miller's voice came through. Don't shoot yet. Let him get closer. We'll trap him. Raker stopped a few meters in front of Ben. He didn't speak, just stared with those piercing eyes. Then, suddenly, he raised his hand, revealing something that glittered in the torchlight. Ben's heart stopped. It was a silver necklace with a small locket. The necklace he had given Mia. Oh my God, Ben whispered, his voice trembling. Raker threw the necklace onto the ground, right at Ben's feet. Then he shot back into the darkness like a flash. His laughter echoed among the trees. Chase him! Miller yelled over the radio. Ben ran with all his might, followed by the other officers from their posts. But, as always, the figure vanished without a trace behind the massive trees. Only faint tracks on the ground remained. Ben knelt, panting, his hand picking up the necklace. Tears almost fell. Mia? Are you still alive? I will find you, he vowed. In the distance, the hoarse laugh returned, long and piercing the night. Katoomba, already grim, now sank deeper into terror. The locals who heard about Raker's appearance in front of the police were even more convinced they were no longer dealing with a human. And Ben knew this game wasn't over. The silver necklace in his hand wasn't just proof, it was an invitation to step further into the darkness. The days after Raker's appearance in front of Ben made Katoomba sink deeper into terror. The nights felt longer than usual. House lights stayed on until morning. Children slept huddled in their parents' arms. Prayers never stopped. But despite the prayers and tightened guard, the fear wouldn't go away. Every snap of a twig made people look up in panic. Every bark of a dog was seen as a bad omen. Even the sound of the wind rustling through the trees sounded like terrifying whispers. At Sharon's house, 3 mysterious knocks echoed on her wooden door. When she gathered the courage to open it, no one was there. Only a dead crow hanging from her fence, a dark cloth tied around its leg. She screamed in terror. Her cries were heard, and the news immediately spread throughout the town. Locals were even more convinced Raker wasn't just human. He was considered an embodiment of evil, come to curse the town. At the town hall, the atmosphere of an emergency meeting heated up again. Several men demanded the police take stronger action. If you can't catch him, let us handle it, a local shouted, his face tense. Detective Sergeant Miller tried to calm them. The police are not sitting idle. We have a plan. Trust us, Raker will be caught. But his words didn't fully ease the panic. The locals had already lost so much, from their abandoned orchards to the feeling of safety in their own homes. That night, Ben sat on the veranda of the station. His eyes stared into the dark bush. MIA's silver necklace was held tightly in his pocket. Every time he touched it, his chest felt tight with a mix of hope and fear. Officer Rendy, his young colleague, approached with 2 cups of coffee. Don't be so hard on yourself, mate. We all want Mia to be found. Ben accepted the coffee, smiling bitterly. You don't understand, Rendy. Every night, I hear her voice calling from the bush. I don't know if it's real or just Raker playing games. Rendy fell silent, not knowing what to say. Only the sound of crickets filled the night's silence. A few nights later, the terror escalated. A local's sheep pen was found destroyed. The animals were gone without a trace. On the ground, there were only strange, large footprints, longer than a human's. The locals panicked. Some were convinced Raker had supernatural allies. Before that fear could subside, the power in part of the town suddenly cut out. Darkness fell, lit only by oil lamps. And in the dark, that hoarse laugh echoed from multiple directions. Children cried hysterically. Adults recited prayers loudly. The police tried to calm the residents by firing up the generator at the town hall, but the atmosphere remained terrifying. Many families chose to sleep crowded into the hall, too afraid to return to their own homes. Ben was increasingly convinced all this terror was just Raker's way of diverting attention. He was deliberately making the town panic so he could move freely. One night, when everyone was busy on guard, Ben heard a faint sound from the direction of the bush. A woman's voice softly, as if calling his name. Ben? He moved without hesitation, pushing through the scrub with a small torch in his hand. His breath was fast, his chest pounding. At the edge of a small creek, the voice disappeared. There was only the gurgle of water and the shadows of trees. Ben stood, panting, trying to find a sign. His eyes then caught something snagged on a tree root, a white handkerchief with small embroidered flowers on the corner. Ben grabbed it, his hands trembling. Tears welled in his eyes. He recognized it. This handkerchief belonged to Mia. A small gift he had once given her with so much love. Ben gripped the handkerchief tightly. Mia is alive. I'm sure of it. He returned to the town, carrying the proof. Detective Sergeant Miller saw him, his brow furrowing. What's that? Ben showed him the dirty, damp handkerchief. It's Mia's. I'm sure she's still alive. Miller was silent for a long time. If that's true, then the situation is more complicated than we thought. Raker might not be alone. Those words made the hair on Ben's neck stand up. If there was another mastermind behind all this, who would be brave and cruel enough to conspire with Raker? That night, Ben sat alone on the veranda, gripping the white handkerchief, which now felt heavy, as if carrying 1,000 questions. He knew one thing for sure, this game wasn't over, and Mia was in the middle of it. Meanwhile, deep in the bush, 2 shadows stood side by side. The thin figure in the ragged coat, and another, smaller, hooded figure. A cold voice was heard, whispering. He's starting to suspect. Raker just laughed quietly. Let him. The more he searches, the further he'll fall into the trap. The night grew thicker, and the deadly game had just entered its next phase. The town's breaking point. The days after finding the white handkerchief made Ben even more restless. He barely slept. His eyes were red, his face pale. Every night he sat on the veranda of the town hall, staring at the bush with a gaze full of longing and determination. He always gripped the handkerchief, as if it were the one thread of hope that Mia was still out there. But for the residents of Katoomba, that hope wasn't enough. They were losing their patience. One afternoon, a group of locals stormed the makeshift police post. A middle-aged man spoke loudly. "We've already lost our livelihoods, our homes, and even our families. If the police can't stop Raker, let us handle it." The crowd roared in agreement. Some carried machetes, stakes, even hunting rifles. Their faces were full of anger, mixed with fear. Detective Sergeant Miller stood in front of them, his voice trying to be firm. "Don't be reckless. This is what Raker wants. He wants you angry, chaotic, and acting without a plan. If you go into that bush unprepared, you'll just become more victims." But the locals were not easily calmed. Another young man shouted, "How long do we have to wait? Our kids are terrified every night. The orchards can't be worked, the markets are empty. Our lives are ruined." The atmosphere grew more heated. Several people raised their weapons, as if ready to move that night. Seeing the volatile situation, Ben stepped forward. He held up the white handkerchief he'd found by the creek. "Listen to me. This belongs to Mia, my fiancée. I found it in the bush. It's proof that she is still alive." The crowd suddenly went quiet. All eyes were fixed on the tattered handkerchief Ben was holding. "If it's true there's still someone to save, we can't be reckless. If we act alone, we'll lose everything. But if we stick together, we still have hope," Ben said, his voice trembling but firm. A mother spoke softly. "If that's true, then there's still hope." Slowly, the atmosphere calmed down. Although it was clear the locals' anger hadn't fully subsided, they dispersed with grim faces. Some returned to the town hall, some to their homes to pack their bags. That night, the guard was tightened. Patrol posts were set up at 3 entry points to the bush. Torches were lit along the town's main street. A community prayer was held again in the park, led by Pastor Karim. His voice was loud, even though his hands were shaking. "We must not be defeated by fear." Ben chose to patrol alone. The blue scarf and the white handkerchief were in his pocket. Those two items had become his source of strength. But behind that determination, his heart was also haunted by guilt. Every new victim, every cry from the locals, felt like it was blaming him for not yet succeeding in finding Mia. At the police station, the mood was just as bleak. Several officers were losing their spirit. A young constable spoke harshly. "This is insane. We are not up against an ordinary criminal. He can appear and disappear as he pleases." Another chimed in. "This town is already finished. What's the point of us staying?" Detective Sergeant Miller slammed his hand on the table, silencing them. "We will not retreat. If we leave, this town will fall completely into Raker's hands. Remember your oath, to protect the community, even with our lives." But his own tone sounded more fragile than usual. He knew his team's morale was shattered. Ben, who had been silent, finally stood up. "If you want to leave, go. But don't expect me to join you. I will stay here until Raker is caught, or until I am dead." The room fell silent. All eyes were on Ben. "You know this isn't just a job anymore, right?" Miller said quietly. "You're personally involved." Ben clenched his fists, his voice shaking. "I don't care. As long as Mia hasn't been found, I will not stop." His words silenced the room. Some were moved, others grew more worried. That night, as some of the locals tried to sleep in the town hall, Ben sat on the veranda again, staring into the dark bush. The night wind carried a strange sound. In the distance, it was like a soft laugh, sent intentionally to mock him. Ben gripped Mia's handkerchief tighter. "I will find her," he whispered. "Whatever it takes." And deep in the bush, two figures stood side by side again. Raker let out a short laugh, while the hooded figure remained silent, its eyes glinting in the dark. Let him become more convinced. The closer he gets, the greater his fall will be. The cold voice echoed. Raker just bowed slightly, a faint smile on his lips. The game had just entered a much more dangerous phase. The sound of clanging metal, the hooded group revealed. That morning, Katoomba was still covered in a grim haze. Thin smoke from household fireplaces rose into the sky, but it didn't carry the usual peaceful aroma. People's faces remained tense, their steps hurried, their eyes full of anxiety. In the old apple orchard to the east, a farmer suddenly screamed. His voice carried all the way to the town hall. Locals ran towards the sound, then stopped, horrified. Dozens of young apple trees had been ripped from the ground and arranged to form a strange symbol, a massive, crude knife, pointing towards the town. Fresh blood stained the branches. An old woman cried hysterically. "It's a sign of death." The crowd pushed in, some terrified, some yelling in anger. Mayor Jeffries immediately called the police. Ben arrived with two colleagues, staring at the symbol, his face tight. "He's deliberately leaving a message. He wants us to know he's here," Ben said softly. Detective Sergeant Miller inspected it closer. "This blood is still warm. It's not from an animal." The locals panicked even more. Some refused to return to their properties. Others insisted on evacuating that very night. While everyone was busy with the symbol in the orchard, Ben followed a narrow track back to the old shack he had found. His gut told him, there's something there. Two officers followed, guarding his back. The shack looked even more menacing than before. Its tin door was locked with a rusted chain. The walls were covered in faint graffiti. Ben moved closer, shining his torch. His eyes widened. There was a new knife symbol carved crudely, smeared with fresh blood. An officer shuddered. "Boss, this is definitely not a coincidence." Ben touched the carving. His chest felt tight. He knew we'd come back here. He wanted to leave a message. As he was about to leave, Ben saw a pile of straw in the corner of the shack. Carefully, he moved it aside and found something half-burnt, a small, tattered book, with some pages scorched. He opened it slowly. Handwriting filled the pages. Much of it was damaged, but among the remaining sentences, one made his blood run cold. "If he finds out the secret, it will all be over. Do not let him get out." Ben swallowed. Who was he? And what secret had to be hidden? Detective Sergeant Miller, who had joined him to examine the book, frowned. "This isn't just a diary. There are codes here, warnings." Ben gripped the book tightly. "I have to find the answer." That night, the locals gathered again at the town hall. The sound of prayers echoed once more, but their faces remained pale. They had heard the news of the symbol in the orchard and the secret book. Rumors spread. Some said it was proof of a deal with the devil. Others believed the town was under an old curse. Children cried, adults argued. Some wanted to leave that very night. Ben stood on the veranda, staring at the dark bush. He held Mia's handkerchief in one hand, the tattered little book in the other. He knew these two things were not a coincidence. This was all a puzzle, leading him to something bigger. Officer Rendy approached him, his face anxious. "Mate, are you sure this isn't a trap?" Ben turned, his eyes full of determination. "If it is a trap, I'm still walking into it. Because somewhere behind all this is Mia." In the distance, the faint, rhythmic sound of metal clanging suddenly started up from the bush. It was quiet, but clear, like someone slowly banging on an old oil drum. The locals who heard it panicked. "It's another sign of death," an old woman shrieked. Ben gripped his weapon. "No. It's a sign that they want us to come." Detective Sergeant Miller looked at Ben for a long time. "We have to be careful. We are getting closer. And that's exactly when it's most dangerous." Ben nodded, his eyes still fixed on the bush. Whatever was waiting behind those trees, he was ready to face it. Because every clue, every symbol, and every sound was leading him closer to Mia. And deep in the bush, the two figures stood side by side again. Raker laughed quietly, while the hooded figure opened a similar book in their hands. The voice was cold, almost emotionless. "He has found the first part. Soon, he will know. But by the time he does, it will all be too late." Raker just grinned, his eyes glowing. The night grew darker, and the game deepened. That night, the faint sound of clanging metal from the bush sent the entire town of Katoomba into a panic again. The sound of metal on metal was slow, rhythmic, and clear, as if being played from deep in the darkness. Residents woke up, looking at each other with pale faces. Children cried. Mothers prayed loudly, while the men ran to the town hall, faces full of panic. In the midst of the chaos, Ben stood tall, staring at the bush. This sound wasn't just terror. He was sure something was hidden behind it. Detective Sergeant Miller quickly gathered a small team. "We can't just sit here. We have to find the source of that sound. Tonight." Ben nodded quickly. "I'm coming." They moved through the track, torches and flashlights cutting through the dark. The closer they got, the clearer the sound became, as if some strange ritual was happening in the middle of the bush. The officers' breathing quickened, the hair on their necks standing on end. When they reached a small clearing, they froze. There, a bizarre collection of scrap metal, old saw blades, and heavy pipes hung from the branches, arranged like a massive, twisted wind chime. Though no one was visible playing it, the sound continued to echo, the metal pieces vibrating as if touched by unseen hands. A young officer stepped back, his face pale. "Boss, this makes no sense." Ben held his breath, then stepped forward, his torch scanning the area. Suddenly, from behind the trees, the figure of Raker emerged. His Drizabone was ragged, his eyes glowing red. A hoarse laugh cut through the air. "You were brave enough to come all this way," he rasped. "Good. I've been waiting." The police raised their weapons. "Don't move," Miller yelled. But Raker just laughed, long and hard. "You think you can catch me with guns? You've walked right into the trap." Instantly, screams were heard from the direction of the town. Flames shot high into the sky. Locals were running in panic. Cries for help echoed. Miller realized it instantly. "It's a diversion. He wanted us away from the town." Ben turned, his face white. "Mia," he whispered, then ran as fast as he could back towards the town. At the town hall, the scene was chaos. Several houses at the edge of town were on fire. Locals were screaming. Some tried to douse the flames with buckets of water, others could only cry. Ben, along with several officers, helped evacuate children trapped inside. His body was covered in smoke, his hands lightly burned, but he didn't care. Every scream made his chest tighten with guilt. The fire was finally extinguished just before dawn. But 2 houses were completely destroyed, and 1 resident had died, trapped inside. The town sank deeper into grief. A man screamed, his face contorted with rage. "This is Raker's doing. He wants us all dead." Other locals wept, some fainted from shock. Ben sat on the veranda of the town hall, gripping Mia's handkerchief. His eyes were empty, his heart full of guilt. "If only I had been faster, this wouldn't have happened." Randy clapped him on the shoulder. "Mate, don't blame yourself. Raker is cruel. He's playing all of us." Ben turned, his eyes sharp. "That's exactly why I have to find him. Mia is the key to all of this. As long as she isn't found, Raker will keep playing us." Detective Sergeant Miller stood near them, his face grim. Tonight's fire wasn't just terror. He wants to destroy this town, piece by piece. Ben clenched his fists. "No. This isn't just Raker's game. There's someone